This is Bob Dart's school cap. I was minded to put it there when we had a lost property announcement. And I know my friend Meg Bent will recognise it. Hampton Grammar, yeah. And inside it says, Barty Dart, 6A, 7.5. And as I say on my website, I don't think he could have been that big-headed.
Second bridesmaid in Rutherford.
He was the second bridesmaid in Rutherford. Meg's uncle was there. So anyway, I mean, I'm really glad that we've reached this stage, and I'm very proud that we have an archive, and I'm so pleased to see so many people here who will now know about it and hopefully spread the word, because the whole point, and I'm sure this is very Darty, is that he wanted things to be used. He wanted his instruments to be used, and I'm sure he would want anything that we can, you know, pick through from the archive to be of interest and value for future generations. And as one of the last, as the class of 71, the year Dart died, I realised that, you know, I'm the last of the, I'm in the group that was the last of the generation that actually Dart taught. So I think it does behove my group at least to try and do something right before we fall off the cliff. Otherwise we'd be, you know, leaving it entirely to people who never met Dart. Now, I only knew Dart as an undergraduate. So obviously, I mean, I never called him Bob. Many of my peers were fairly, frankly, terrified. I wasn't. I always found him very kind and approachable. It was probably because I was too stupid to pick up some of the subtleties of it. In fact, just to talk about myself very briefly, my very first contact with Bob Dart was when I applied to go to King's in London, which was entirely based on the fact that I'd read the interpretation of music. Plus, one other factor, it did say nobody will be admitted without an interview. And as I was at school in Singapore and dying to come home, I thought, this is great. I'll get a free trip to Blighty just for the interview. So when I got his letter, which offered me an unconditional place, I was really rather disappointed. And when I arrived, Bill Oxenbury, who will enter stage left any minute now, his first words to me were, as the freshers all lined up, he said, I know who you are because I've never seen you before. So I was always one of the odd ones out, really, and perhaps that's remained so to this day. Now, anybody who ever met Thurston Dart will, I think, agree with me that he was some kind of force of nature. He wasn't very typical of anything, I don't think. He was just special. He couldn't fail to feel the difference when he walked in the room. He was a big man, bigger than me, and he had big feet. He was quite dapper, but at the same time, you didn't think he was sporty. You know, he was a presence. So, you know, when he died very suddenly, and I think we were all surprised, including him to some extent, there was this gaping hole. His life's work was certainly nowhere near complete. He was probably in his prime, and as Chris said, he was only 49, and he certainly had no intention of dying. I mean, the Dodo, I don't know if any of you have seen my modest website, which is created by my friend Doug Taylor there, who I will publicly thank now for doing that. But there's a small, modest biography of Dart on there, and he, you know, in the Dodo pad at Bill's flat in London, there were engagements long into the future. He didn't expect to die, and I don't think many people thought he would. So it was all very sudden, and to this day, I think there's been something missing in terms of recognition. Bent has written about Dart for Grove and for the wonderful book called Source Materials, Sources and the Interpretation of Music, which was largely which he edited, which was largely the work of his students, but very little about Dart himself. And as Chris alluded to, there were so many things one didn't know. What was he really like behind all the fancy waistcoats? What was he really like once the gin and tonic came out, at the end of the day? What did he do in the war? That was a big mystery. We knew it was some kind of off, but it was a secret, and so on and so forth. And what happened to Bull? Where was the Bull? That increasingly became a mystery in its own right, really. So I felt that, I think we all felt, there were BBC programmes, I know Chris was usually on them, radio programmes like BBC Legends and Mining the Archive, and they talk about Dart and so many questions, so many things that were missing, and what if, and so as fate would have it, I became a very firm pal of Bill Oxenbury, who was Dart's right-hand man. He did all the admin that freed Dart up to do the research and play all the gigs and everything. He'd been Secretary of Philharmonica. He became Sub-Dean at King's. He was pretty terrifying as well at times, and in tandem they were awesome. You virtually crept, Les will back me up, you crept past the office. And I don't want to tell too many anecdotes because it's too personal, but ask me afterwards. Some of the times when you went in you thought you were going to get carpeted and you came out smiling, Anyway, Bill had a flat, the legendary flat at Gordon House in Welbeck Street. I expect many of us have been there. And Bob had a room there, and he had the clavichord and various other things, the desk and so on. And there was this trunk. Now, I slept in that room hundreds of times and never looked in the trunk. I wish I had now, but at the same time, it would have spoiled the story, because in that trunk, which we only discovered when Bill had to move out and later was in a nursing home, and eventually we had to deal with all this stuff, was all this Dartiana, or as I call it, objet d'art. And at first I thought, well, it's not much, these compositions, but I think he did do them at school. I think he wisely retired after that from composition. And, the cap and the hairbrush and some cutlery, and then I started to look at it, and it was an interesting letter, and that's in French. And as I dug deeper, I realised this could be greater than the sum of the parts. If you put that together with that, and you read, for example, the letter from the RAF about what Bob did in the war, and then you trace information about the people who work out what he actually did, which, if you want to know, is on my website. It's to do with bombing. And so it had a momentum, and with Doug's help, I put a small biography on the website based on simply two things. One is what I could deduce from these papers and objet d'art and my own recollections. And the other thing that happened was that I got such a response. I started getting emails from North America, Australia. Do you know this? Do you know? Oh, we're so pleased. Bob Dart's never had the recognition he deserved. And I realised that so many people felt the same way. So next thing was I talked to Meg and Les, and I said, look, if I've got this stuff, what am I going to do with it? I can't keep it. It's a privilege to have it, and I want to share it. I want other people to be able to use it, and I'm sure other people have got stuff. And they said straight away, well, we'll see what we've got. I said, well, look, if we can get a critical mass of materials, we can then invite other people to add stuff. And as long as we choose the right home for it, to give it sufficient prominence, which I'm sure we've done, and we can then say to people, this is the plan, this is where it's going to be. If you would like to donate now or later, or even afterwards, it's there, it's up and running. And the very first donation we had, I was sitting at the computer with Anna, who I must also thank, since I've just mentioned her, who has done so much to make this happen, and I'm very grateful for the kind way she's responded to all my questions and so on. We were sitting there, and an email came in, and the Royal College of Organists had agreed to contribute the Bull manuscript, which I spotted in their cupboard when I went to see Francis, who's also here. I can't see her right now. Hi, thank you too. Anyway, what a great start that was. So we'd already got the bull, we've got the cap. Actually, you didn't want the cap, did you? I'll take it home. It doesn't qualify. And, you know, to all the papers, I've got a brief list of, well, I say brief, I mean, there's so much stuff. There was the juvenile compositions, manuscripts, manuscript books, personal letters, professional letters, correspondence about the Royal Musical Association, the whole debate about Musica Britannica. Did you know that Encyclopedia Britannica tried to stop Musica Britannica from using the name? Litigation was almost begun before they backed down. Royal Musical Association, the point about Dart was his energy must have been phenomenal. You know, those train rides back from London were probably about the only rest he had. He was ticking over, wasn't he? I mean, Musica Britannica, Stainer and Bell, he was the chairman of that, all the stuff he did abroad, BBC performances, there are inventories, this is going to be useful, the inventories of all Dart's books and scores which stayed at King's College. They're not all there now, but you know, if you want to trace them, we have the inventories here. His birth certificate and his will, which is also revealing, many obituaries and articles, about 50 photographs. So that's refreshing, because I think we've all seen the same 2 or 3 for years. Some cartoons, a lovely book of the RAF people, including a great one of Bob, and you'll see a couple of other ones, one's upstairs. Insurance valuations, and very useful. When some of his instruments went to auction, you know, there were descriptions like Tom Goff, I brought it by the way, a description of the clavichord. And all these things we were able to trace a vial that is now, I think, in Italy, and all this sort of stuff, the provenance side of it has been possible because of these documents. Now, Ian and Meg have contributed a lot of correspondence about Grove and personal stuff, and very interesting it is too. And Les has contributed scores that came to him by Alan Percival, many of which are annotated by Dart, and it's all very interesting. I'm very hopeful that future scholars will, you know, put 2 and 2 together and make at least 5. I think, you know, it is far greater than the sum of the parts, and it's really quite exciting, I think, that something else to supplement the odd BBC programme, the odd bit of biography here and there. You know, there's something else that will go forward. I see this as more as a beginning than an end. I should mention the LPs, which I eventually twisted Anna's arm to accept the LPs. They're all Dart's own copies of his own recordings. I don't think they've ever been played. But the thing that swung it was I pointed out that they've got a unique set of articles on the back, because he always wrote his own sleeve notes. So there are about 70 articles by Dart that won't be published anywhere else. And interesting, there are also a couple of, I think they're called acetates, when he did live BBC concerts, they would record it and give him the LP. And they're in there as well. So I'm hoping that if anyone wants to ask either of us a question, or wants to have any kind of discussion, that you'll feel free now or later to bring anything up. Thank you.